Give the opportunity to chat for a few minutes. I'm sure some of the things I'm going to say you've heard already. I mean, I'm not sure how many new things I have here, but just from my perspective in thinking about this, I'll just kind of go through a few thoughts. So, in general, I would put myself in the category of data users, and there are different ways to use data, some kind of big picture ways and some small picture ways. And you might need different data to suit different needs. And, particularly if you're thinking about organizations like Interior who are extremely decentralized and make many, many decisions at a pretty low organizational level, even with respect to recreation decisions, it's useful to have some recreation data at those levels. It's also useful to have kind of agency-wide data too, and going from one to the other is not necessarily easy. And you can't just always roll things up because there may be nothing to roll up. But okay, so that's just kind of a general point about uses. Visitation data, can be used in a lot of different ways. As I said, one way is related to fees and fee structures. And it can help you inform how you set fees. At least from an economic perspective, prices are used to ration demand and supply sometimes. So this is the way our economy works. There's nothing special here, right? It's just prices are just a rationing device. And so, those kinds of devices are not really much used in the recreation world, but there's opportunities there to do that. And that's something to think about. Someone mentioned to me that it might be useful to have kind of a dashboard of federal data. I think that might be a good idea. But I think it's pretty challenging to do that in the short term. But there are probably things you could do along steps you could take that might get you there eventually. But it's not an easy thing to pull off, I would say. Okay, let me turn to just visitation data for a minute. So. You all know that Interior has, all the Interior bureaus have many, many recreation facilities and sites. In 2015, the Interior sites got roughly 440 million visits. While all the agencies collect some data on visitation and visitor participation, the methods and quality of that data vary a lot, I would say, across the agencies. I mean, even within agencies sometimes too. So okay, we would like to have accurate, reliable data for planning purposes. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. It could help inform investments, no question about that. And it could help you just explain the patterns, what's going on nationally, regionally, locally. Better visitation data would probably help researchers and nonprofits and other non-governmental groups too. So it's clear there's a need for better data, I would say. I mean, we have kind of a baseline level now. So what's missing? So, okay, we've got some visitation counts by agency. Sometimes you can get it by site too. The data collection methods vary quite a bit, and I would say they're not very sophisticated right now. Traffic counts are, that's kind of standard in a lot of ways. But in some ways, that's good at least, because you're counting something, right? And you're not relying on just kind of anecdotal information or someone standing out there counting and then they miss something or whatever. But so the traffic counts aren't necessarily bad, but it's pretty basic. And it's been that way for, I don't know, tell me how many years. A lot of years. So there's some improvements there probably that can be made. Now, we also know something about visitor spending patterns. I don't think we have great information on that. We have kind of average information on that. And those spending patterns, by spending pattern, what I mean is when a visitor goes to a site, there's a pattern they're spending. They spend on gas, hotels, whatever. And it differs maybe by activity, by site, and if you're interested in economic impact information, you need those spending patterns. You need to know those spending patterns. And the only way to get those spending patterns is to collect information, really, from visitors. You've got to ask them. So, those are surveys that are, maybe time and resource intensive to get done. And it's infeasible to think we could do that on, every single site. But right now, they're not really done that often. And, we operate on some basic averages, which might be okay, for some things. But I can see other uses where it might be helpful to have more detailed spending pattern information. But you got to go out and get that information. That's an investment. It's not necessarily easy to do that. Okay, Rick talked about the recreation.gov data. I think this is a great data source, and we've started looking at some of it. It's a tremendous data source. There's a lot to be learned there. In some ways, this is to me the first really rich new data source that's become available since I've been in Interior, really. It's an extremely rich data set, and there's lots to be done. It's complicated though, because there's a lot going on. So you need to look at it carefully. But there's a lot that can be done, I think. So I'm really hoping that by looking at that data, we can provide some insights into how, where, when people recreate, where they're going, what kind of values they place on recreating. You can do some basic economic modeling to get some of those issues with this data, I think. One of the issues that I think Margaret raised before when we were talking about this meeting was what kind of demand is for data by stakeholders. And I would say one of the hardest things that many stakeholders have to address is trade-offs. Now, in the world of budgeting and resource allocation, even within Interior's bureaus, understanding those trade-offs is critical. So the classic, poster, stereotype trade-off might be between some mineral extraction activity and recreation. Happens all the time. Well, I mean, and again, kind of stereotype examples here. Often the extractive activities went out in the sense that they're allowed to proceed, and maybe it impairs recreation resources in some way. And part of the reason that happens is because there's not enough data on recreation to understand the trade-off in an economic sense. I'm not just talking here about economic impacts, which a lot of economists would look at and say, well, that's only one measure. We need the actual economic values to match against the market values of the minerals. So you need better data to help understand those trade-offs. Getting that data can be pretty challenging, though, because you often need it for specific locations that might be defined by some planning area. So it doesn't necessarily, which doesn't necessarily match up with the way that the agency typically would collect the information. So you're in the position of, okay, we need a one-off study, basically. But that one-off study is going to cost you something. Doing these one-off studies, especially those that involve in-person, face-to-face data collection, they're not cheap. And if you have a big decision, you're not going to rely on telephone surveys and stuff like that. You need to be doing in-person surveys to get out there and just get that information. Okay, let me just talk briefly here about a project that we've just recently started, and then I'll talk just for a minute about satellite account. So we just started a project. We got a bit of funding internally to do this, is to look to do a project that's going to compare across all the federal agencies the methods of collecting visitation data and how those can be improved. So this is something I think that people have taken a run at in the past, but that really hasn't really gone anywhere. So it's just time to do this again. It hasn't been done for a while. So we've just started this work. So there's as I mentioned earlier, I think the visitation data collection methods have been static for a long time. There's a lot of new things out there that could be considered and should be considered. I'm not saying they're all going to solve the problems, but there's a lot of choices now about how to collect some of this data, and there hasn't been a lot of systematic thought about really how to use it and how it can be put together in a systematic way. So we have this project just started. It's probably 8 months to a year total. but we're pretty excited about that, and I think it's going to be helpful.
Excuse me, are you looking across agencies within Interior solely, or is it more broadly?
Interior, Forest Service,
Okay,
Corps of Engineers,
Okay.
NOAA,
No, okay, great.
all the federal, all the agencies that do have recreation on the lands and waters they manage.
That's good.
Let's see, the satellite account. So I think this is a good thing too. And as was mentioned, there are some efforts underway to get this account started. I think this is challenging though. This establishing a satellite account is not just a cut and dry thing. There are a lot of choices to be made. This is like making sausage, really. And maybe you don't want to see how it's made, but there are many choices to be made here, and that will ultimately affect the estimates. So at BEA, I have a great deal of respect from them. They do this is their reason for being. They do this work all the time. But it is going to be challenging. And let me just let me just highlight two things here. Defining the outdoor recreation economy. Forza has a definition, but there are other definitions out there. And let me tell you, BEA is not going to go out on a limb here when they do this. They're a conservative organization, conservative in the sense that if they're putting numbers out, they want them to be believable and robust, and they're not going to take chances and define things in a way that a lot of people could criticize. I'm not saying that's what anyone would do, but they're going to be pretty careful about it, I think. I would expect them to be careful about how they do it. Now, the other thing I would just highlight is just collecting the data itself to do the estimates. It's challenging right there. I mean, the visitation data, that's part of what's going to go into BEA's numbers. The visitation data comes from the agencies, the federal agencies, maybe some state agencies, maybe some local entities. Somehow that's all got to be mashed together and considered in a consistent way. Not sure how they're going to do that exactly, but that'll be a challenge. And there's certainly, as I said, that part of it, the data part of it, can certainly be improved. Let me mention one more thing here that no one has mentioned. That's kind of a future challenge. If you're thinking ahead here about how you can use data to help you think about what might be coming. I mean, the biggest thing headed at the recreation sector really is climate change. It's going to change where people recreate, how they recreate, when they recreate, can they recreate in ways that they did in the past. I mean, you need to be looking at the data that would help you understand how people's recreation behavior is going to change, and it's going to change. I mean, already on the coast, you have recreation areas that are inundated or will be inundated shortly. People can't recreate there anymore. They've got to either go somewhere else, right, or do something else. So, I mean, no matter how you feel about climate change, I think these changes are coming in people's behavior, and so it's, I think, helpful to think about how to use some of the data to help think about those things. Okay, I think I've used up more than my time here, probably. So, thank you.
Thanks.